Good afternoon to everyone watching. My name is Berenice Ferreira. I'm 83 years old, and today I want to share a story with you that I've kept secret for many decades. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk with you, even if it's just through a screen. It was 1954, and I had just turned 11 when my father died in an accident at the factory where he worked. My mother, a strong woman but devastated by the loss, had to work twice as hard to support me and my two younger brothers. We lived in a small town in the countryside of Minas Gerais, one of those places where everyone knows everyone. 6 months after my father's death, my mother met Auguste, a man who worked as an accountant at the town bank. He seemed to be everything we needed: polite, respected in the community, and apparently in love with my mother. To everyone in town, he was the man who came to rescue the widow and her 3 children. How wrong they all were. At first, he really did seem like a good person. He brought us kids presents, helped my mother with the bills, and even got her a better job at City Hall. Everyone admired his actions. 6 months later, they got married in a simple ceremony at the town church. That's when everything began to change, but only when no one was looking. My mother now worked from 8 to 5 every day. August left early in the morning and came home later around 6. But there was one day a week when he returned home at lunchtime when my brothers were at my grandmother's house and I was alone because I attended school in the afternoon. The first time it happened was 3 months after the wedding. I was in the kitchen making a snack before going to school when I heard the front door open. August came in, smiled at me in a strange way, and said he had forgotten some documents. He asked if I could help him look in his room. Once we entered the room, he locked the door. What happened next is something that even today, at 83 years old, makes my hands shake when I remember. "This will be our secret," he said afterward. "If you tell your mother, she won't believe you and will be very sad. You're going to be in need again and your little brothers will suffer. Is that what you want?" I was shocked, scared, and confused. I had just turned 12 and that marked the start of my weekly nightmare. Every Wednesday, he would come back at lunchtime. I tried to come up with excuses not to be home, but when I did, he would get furious and threaten to tell my mother that I was being rebellious and disrespectful. In a small town in the 1950s, a troubled child was a disgrace to the family. I once tried to tell my teacher. She fell silent, visibly uncomfortable, and then said, "Berenice, you shouldn't make up stories about adults, especially about your stepfather who has done so much for your family. That's a sin." In that moment, I realized no one would believe me over him. August was a respected man. He went to Mass every Sunday, was on the town council, and was known for his generosity toward our family. Time passed, and I became a quiet teenager, always looking down. My mother thought it was just shyness or a difficult phase of adolescence. My classmates thought I was strange. But inside me grew not only pain and shame, but also a quiet determination. On my 13th birthday, August gave me a shoebox tied with a red bow. Inside was a pretty dress he said was our secret. That's when I had an idea. That shoebox would be my ally. After everyone went to sleep that night, I took everything out, hid the dress in the back of the closet, and started using the box to store evidence. It was hard to collect solid proof in the 1950s without cell phones or cameras, but I got clever. I kept tissues with lipstick stains he had forgotten in his pockets, taking them when I washed his clothes. I wrote down dates, times, and what he said on small scraps of paper. Once, when he tore my blouse and I had to sew it before my mother saw, I saved a small scrap with stains. For 5 long years, that box kept filling up. I hid it under a loose floorboard in my room. As I grew older, I learned to defend myself in small ways. I made up a study schedule at the library that coincided with Wednesdays. When I couldn't avoid being home, I would hide kitchen knives in strategic spots just to feel a little safer. Every year on my birthday, I'd look at that box and think, it's not time yet. August kept up the illusion of being the model citizen in everyone's eyes. My mother, though exhausted from hard work, seemed content with the stability we had. My brothers admired him, and I alone carried the burden of that terrible secret that slowly destroyed my childhood and adolescence. On the eve of my 18th birthday, while everyone else was asleep, I opened that box and revisited every piece of evidence I had kept for 5 years. The next day, my mother insisted on throwing a small party to celebrate my coming of age. She invited my uncles, some close neighbors, and even the teacher who hadn't believed in me years ago. To everyone else, it would be just another family birthday celebration. For me, it would be the day I finally broke the silence. On the morning of my 18th birthday, I woke up before sunrise. I spent a few minutes staring at the ceiling of my room, feeling the weight of the box hidden beneath the floorboards. This was the day. There was no turning back. The night before had been tough. August had cornered me in the laundry room while I was folding clothes and whispered that he had a special gift for my birthday. I managed to escape telling him my mother was calling me, but his gaze followed me until I left the room. That would be the last look of its kind, I promised myself. Carefully, I lifted the loose floorboard and pulled out the shoebox. For 5 years, that little container had held not only evidence, but also my sanity. Each item inside was a piece of my pain transformed into strength, into determination. I placed the box under the bed and started getting ready. Berenice, come have breakfast, sweetheart. Today is your special day. My mother's voice echoed down the hallway. I took a deep breath, looked at myself in the small vanity mirror, and practiced a smile. For 5 years, I had become an excellent actress. In the kitchen, my mother had prepared a simple cake. My brothers Paul and Robert, now 14 and 12 years old, sat eagerly at the table. August was there too, wearing that smile everyone thought was kind, but for me it concealed monsters. My favorite birthday girl is turning 18. Time really flies, he said, placing his hand on my shoulder. I fought the urge to pull away. Today, I needed to keep up appearances more than ever. The day dragged on slowly. I helped my mom with the preparations for the small party we were having that night. She had invited some family members, nearby neighbors, and a few of my school friends. It wasn't a big gathering, maybe around 20 people in total, but they were the right people, the ones who needed to know. Mom, can I use that embroidered tablecloth Grandma left? The white one with blue flowers? I asked as we tidied the living room. Of course you can, sweetheart. It's stored in the dresser. Your father loved that tablecloth. We only ever used it on special occasions. She smiled wistfully. How I miss my dad, I thought. If he were alive, none of this would have happened. As the afternoon went by, I felt a mix of nervousness and determination. I had rehearsed this moment in my head for so long that it felt unreal that it was finally here. Around 5 o'clock, the first guests began to arrive. Aunt Carmen and Uncle Joseph, our next-door neighbors, Mrs. Irene from the bakery with her husband. One by one, the people who made up the fabric of our small town entered our home to celebrate my 18th birthday. I watched closely as August greeted them, always the perfect host, the devoted stepfather, the model citizen. My elementary school teacher, Mrs. Conchesson, the same one who didn't believe in me all those years ago, arrived with a small package. Congratulations, Berenice. My, how you've grown. I remember you being so small and shy in my class, and now you're a young lady. I smiled politely, thinking about how her neglect had condemned me to years of suffering. But she needed to be here today, too. By 7 o'clock, with all the guests present, my mom asked me to sit in the main chair in the living room. The gift table was nearby, filled with small parcels from neighbors and family. Nothing expensive, just tokens of affection from all of them. It's time for Berenice to open her presents, my mom announced excitedly. Everyone gathered around, forming a semicircle around me. August stood close to my mom, his arm around her in an obvious display of marital affection. I began to unwrap the presents one by one, thanking each person with a smile. A silk scarf from Aunt Carmen, a handmade sweater from Mrs. Irene, a poetry book from Professor Charles. With every gift I opened, my heart raced faster, knowing the moment was drawing near. That's when my mother brought over her gift. This is from me and August, dear. I hope you like it. It was a small box containing a delicate flower-shaped brooch. It belonged to my mother, she explained. And now it's yours. I thanked her, kissing her cheek. August smiled that same smile that terrified me when we were alone. I have something special for you too, Berenice, he said, holding out a small package. This was the moment I had waited for 5 long, torturous years. What a coincidence, I said, my voice steadier than it had ever been in his presence. I also have a special gift for you, August. He seemed surprised but kept smiling at me. But today is your birthday. Yes, I replied, but it's a gift I've been holding on to for a long time. I stood up and went to my room, feeling all eyes on me. I came back with the shoebox, now decorated with a red bow, the same bow that had come with the dress he gave me years ago. The room fell silent as I placed the box in his hands. Open it, I said. It's a gift I've been putting together for 5 years. August looked at the box curiously. My mother smiled, probably thinking it was some collection of keepsakes her daughter had saved for the stepfather who had helped her so much. He removed the bow and lifted the lid. His face went pale instantly. Inside the box, arranged chronologically, were all the items I had carefully collected. Handkerchiefs with lipstick marks, a scrap of my torn shirt stained with blood, detailed notes of dates, times, and descriptions of each abuse, a calendar where I had marked every Wednesday with a red X for 5 years, a lock of my hair that he had cut off as a souvenir during one of the incidents, and at the bottom a letter addressed to my mother describing everything that had happened since that first Wednesday. "What is this?" my mother asked, noticing the sudden change in his expression. "These are gifts," I replied, my voice clear and audible to everyone in the room. "Gifts I received from my stepfather over 5 years, starting when I was 12. August quickly shut the box. "I don't know what this girl is talking about," he said, forcing a smile. "They must be school memories. Why don't you read the letter at the bottom of the box, Mom?" I suggested. "It's a detailed list of all the gifts I got on Wednesdays when you were working and my brothers were at Grandma's house." The silence in the room was deafening. People exchanged puzzled looks. August set the box on the table and stepped toward me. "Berenice is confused," he said, struggling to keep calm. "Maybe it's just birthday nerves." "I've been confused since I was 12, I replied. "Confused about why my mother's husband came into my room when everyone was asleep. Confused about why he gave me presents on the condition that I keep it a secret. Confused about why no one believed me when I tried to ask for help." I looked directly at Mrs. Conciso, my former teacher, who was now staring at me in shock. "Do you remember when I tried to tell you, teacher? You said it was a sin to make up stories about adults." She covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes filling with tears. My mother, pale, took the box from August and began to look through its contents. Her face changed with each item she saw. Tears silently slid down her cheeks as she pulled out the letter at the bottom and started to read. August tried to snatch it from her hands, but my Uncle Joseph grabbed his arm. "Hold on a minute, buddy. This is madness," August protested, searching for supporters. "This girl has always been trouble. You all know that, always making up stories. But now, at 18 years old, I was no longer a frightened child. I was a woman with solid proof of years of abuse, and I had chosen to reveal everything in front of the people who mattered most in our small community. Every item in that box tells a story," I continued. "A story I've kept silent about out of fear, shame, and because no one would believe a child against such a respected man." As my mother wept while reading the letter, other women in the room came to her side. Aunt Carmen hugged her. Mrs. Irene took the box and began showing the items to the others present. The murmur of outrage grew louder by the second. "Get out of my house!" August shouted, trying to take back control of the situation. "Is this a family matter?" "No," I answered, surprising even myself with how firm I sounded. "This is a matter of justice, and today on my 18th birthday, my gift to myself is freedom, and my gift to you, August, is the public shame you deserve. The chaos that followed in that room is something I will never forget." August's expression changed by the second, shock turning to anger, anger to fear, and finally to a desperation I had only seen in people trapped with no way out. His eyes darted around the room, maybe searching for an escape, an explanation, anything to save him in that moment. My mother collapsed onto the couch, supported by Aunt Carmen and Mrs. Irene. The letter trembled in her hands as she tried to process the nightmare that had been living under her roof for so many years. Tears ran down her face, but her eyes were slowly changing from pure sorrow to something I rarely saw in her, fury. "How could you?" she finally said, looking up at August. It wasn't a scream, it was something worse. A question filled with pain and betrayal, almost a whisper that pierced the silence in the room like a blade. "Helena, don't believe her." August tried to approach my mother, but 3 men held him back. My Uncle Joseph, Mrs. Irene's husband, and Professor Charles. "This is a lie. Do you even know this girl? She's been troubled ever since her father died and has always made up stories." I stood my ground, feeling my body shake but my voice steady. That moment had been rehearsed in my mind hundreds of times during those years of abuse. "I will not run anymore," I said, looking right at him. "Every mark in this box tells a true story. Wednesday, May 17th, 1956. You tore my blue shirt when I tried to push you away. I had to sew it up quickly and hide the stained patch. It's here." I pointed to the small piece of blue fabric with dark stains. November 13th, 1957. You left this lipstick-stained handkerchief in the pocket of your shirt after meeting some woman. I found it when I washed your clothes. You didn't notice because you were drunk that night. With each piece of evidence I presented, more people distanced themselves from him, forming a small circle of isolation around him. The image of the exemplary citizen, the devoted stepfather, slowly crumbled. "Get out of my house!" he yelled again, his face flushed with rage. "This isn't your house," my mother replied, struggling to stand but carrying a newfound dignity in her posture. "This house belonged to my husband, Berenice's father." That's when things took an even darker turn for August. My cousin Louisa, who had been silent in a corner of the room, stepped forward. She was 20 at the time, newly married, and rarely visited our home. "Me too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He tried to do the same to me when I came to spend the summer here in 1956. I was 14 years old. I never told anyone because he said no one would believe me." The silence in the room shattered with gasps of horror. August stared at Louisa as if he'd seen a ghost. It hit me then that we were probably not his only victims. How many other girls had endured the same silence imposed by shame and fear? "Liar!" he shouted at Louisa, but his voice was weak now. He was cornered, not just by physical evidence, but by unexpected testimonies. My uncle Joseph, Louisa's father, stepped toward August menacingly, only held back by Professor Charles. "Let's call the police," said the professor, always the most rational one among us. "No," my mother replied with a coldness I had never seen before. "First, I want everyone to know. I want every person in this town to understand who this man really is. The man who pretended to be a good stepfather, an exemplary husband, a respectable citizen." August realized what was happening. In a small town in the 1950s, reputation was everything. A man without reputation lost his job, his friends, his social standing. He looked around desperately and his eyes locked with mine. For the first time in years, he was the one who was scared, not me. "You can't prove anything," he tried one last time. "It's just the words of confused girls against the word of an adult man." That's when my paternal grandfather, who had been silent in a corner of the room, spoke up with something I hadn't expected. "I have proof, August. I've always suspected you. Last year, when Berenice started coming to my house on Wednesdays to study, as she said, I noticed her behavior. She would tremble every time she heard his car passing by on the street. Once he came to pick her up, and I saw the fear in her eyes." My grandfather pulled a small notebook from his pocket. "I began jotting down dates, strange behaviors. I almost went to the police twice, but without solid evidence. Who would believe an old man? Now, with what Berenice has saved, we have more than enough. I didn't know this." I didn't know my grandfather had realized he was also gathering his own evidence, silently worried about his granddaughter. Tears filled my eyes, not from pain this time, but from a relief I had never felt before. I was not alone. I had never truly been alone. Mrs. Conceição, the teacher who hadn't believed me years ago, approached, crying. "Berenice, forgive me. I should have listened to you. I should have looked into it." "It's not your fault," I replied, calling her teacher, although a small part of me knew she did share some responsibility. At that moment, it was more important to unite everyone against the real culprit. August tried to leave through the front door but was stopped by Mrs. Irene's husband. "You're going to stay here until the police arrive," he said. "And after the police arrive?" my mother added. "I want you to leave this house for good." Time seemed to crawl as we waited for the police to come. Someone had called the station from the neighbor's house. Meanwhile, more people showed up. Curious neighbors drawn by the noise, friends passing by. The news spread quickly, just as it does in small towns. Finally, 2 police officers arrived and found August sitting in a chair, isolated from everyone else, guarded by my uncle and some other men. Sergeant Mendez, who had known our family for years, asked to understand what was happening. My mother, regaining some composure, began to explain. She showed them the box, the letter, and asked me to recount what happened. Louisa also gave her testimony. My grandfather presented his notes. The sergeant listened carefully with a serious expression. In the 1950s, cases of abuse against minors rarely reached the authorities. There was a social silence surrounding these issues, a tendency to handle them privately within the family, or simply to ignore them. But the amount of evidence and the number of witnesses made it impossible to ignore. "Let's take Mr. August to the station," he finally said. "The girls will need to give formal statements tomorrow." As the police led him away in handcuffs, passing through the room full of guests at my 18th birthday party, August kept his head down. No longer the confident and respected man, but a predator exposed to the light. People began to disperse after that. Aunt Carmen insisted on staying to help my mother, who was alternating between bouts of crying and moments of silent rage. My brothers, confused and scared, were taken by my grandfather to spend the night at his place. I stayed in the now disheveled, empty room surrounded by remnants of the small celebration that had turned into something so different from what we had planned. The gifts were still piled on the table and the cake was nearly untouched. The shoebox, now empty since its contents had been taken by the police as evidence, felt strangely light in my hands. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" my mother asked when we were finally alone. There was no accusation in her voice, just a deep and incomprehensible sadness. "He said you wouldn't believe me, that we would be left in misery if he left, that it was my fault." The words came out with difficulty. At first I believed him. Then, when I tried to tell the teacher and she didn't believe me, I became certain that no one would. So I started to gather evidence. I waited until I was old enough to be heard. My mother hugged me, a painful and long embrace. I felt her tears soaking my shoulder. "Forgive me," she whispered repeatedly. "Forgive me for not noticing, for bringing this monster into our home." "It's not your fault, Mom," I replied. And in that moment, I truly believed it. You were deceived too. Everyone was. That night, lying in my bed looking up at the familiar ceiling of my room, I felt something strange. Peace. An incomplete, imperfect peace, but still peace. The monster that had dominated my thoughts for years was finally pushed out of my life. The secret that had corroded me from the inside was exposed. The terrified 12-year-old girl could finally begin to heal her wounds. I knew the road ahead would be long. There would be the legal process, the gossip around town, and the stigma that unfairly follows victims in some way. My mother would need time to heal from the betrayal. My siblings would have to come to terms with what happened. Our family would have to rebuild. But for the first time in many years, I slept without fear, without checking if the door was locked or dreading the sound of footsteps in the hallway at night. In that shoebox, I hadn't just stored evidence against August, I had also stored my chance to live again. The days after the revelation were a whirlwind. The morning after my birthday, our small town was already buzzing. August Mendez, the respectable bank accountant, the model stepfather, had been arrested for abusing his stepdaughter for years. People whispered in corners. Neighbors brought cakes and bread to support the family during this difficult time. But I knew many came out of curiosity, eager to confirm the details of the scandal. Accompanied by my mother, I went to the police station to give my formal testimony. The detective, a middle-aged man with a thick mustache and tired eyes, received me in his small, dimly lit office. On the wall behind him hung a portrait of the president and a crucifix, symbols of authority in 1959. "I need you to tell me everything from the start," he said, awkward but firm. "I know it's hard, Berenice, but the more details you share, the stronger the case against your stepfather will be." For 3 hours, I relived every painful moment from the past 5 years. Every Wednesday, every threat, every silent tear. My mother, sitting beside me, alternated between sobbing and stunned silence. I knew every word I spoke was a blade piercing her heart, exposing the horror that unfolded while she worked hard to support us, trusting that man to care for her children. Louisa also gave her testimony that day. While we waited in the narrow hallway of the police station, she held my hand and whispered, "You're the bravest person I've ever met, Berenice. What you did saved other girls he might have hurt." I didn't feel brave, I felt exhausted, but I also felt lighter than I ever had. The secret no longer weighed on my shoulders. In the following days, 2 more young women from the city came forward with similar stories. One was the daughter of a client at the bank where August worked. The other was the niece of a friend of his. In every case, the same pattern emerged: vulnerable girls without a father figure, the same tactics of threats and silencing. The case gained more attention than I had expected. A newspaper from the state capital published a brief note about the respected accountant accused of crimes against minors in a rural town. The bank where he worked fired him immediately. The parish priest delivered a sermon about wolves in sheep's clothing without mentioning any names, but everyone knew who he was talking about. There were also those who didn't believe it. People who said I was making up stories for attention, or that I had seduced the poor man and was now taking revenge because he rejected me. These voices hurt me and made me doubt for a moment whether I had done the right thing. But then I remembered the shoebox, the evidence from the other girls who had come forward, and I knew I had taken the only possible path. The case went to trial 3 months later. It was a painful process with intense questioning where lawyers tried to discredit my testimony. "Why did you wait so long to speak? Why didn't you scream? Why didn't you run away?" as if there were a manual for how a child terrified by an adult in a position of power should behave. But the evidence was overwhelming. The shoebox, the testimonies of the other victims, my grandfather's notebook with his meticulous observations. Even Miss Constance testified, shamefully admitting that I had tried to tell her years ago and she hadn't taken it seriously. In October 1959, August Mendez was sentenced to 8 years in prison, a punishment considered severe for that time, when these crimes were often downplayed or ignored. I remember looking at him when the judge announced the sentence. The imposing and respected man was gone, replaced by a diminished figure with deep dark circles and an empty stare. I felt no joy or desire for revenge at that moment. I only felt deep exhaustion and the wish to start my life over far from that town, where I was now known as August's stepdaughter, the girl from the scandal. "I want to leave, Mom," I said that night as we sat at the kitchen table. "I can't stay here where everyone knows, where everyone whispers when I walk down the street." My mother held my hands on the table. Her face looked more aged, marked by guilt and sadness, but there was also a new strength in her eyes. "Where do you want to go, daughter?" "Nah, Belo Horizonte," I replied without hesitation. "I want to study nursing. I want to care for people, help those who suffer." It was a dream I had kept secret for years, stifled by the weight of abuse and forced silence. Now finally free, I could think about a future. 2 weeks later, I was on a bumpy bus with a small suitcase containing everything I owned, heading to the capital. My Aunt Eunice, my mother's sister, had agreed to take me in while I studied. My mother wanted to come too, to bring my siblings to start over with us, but I knew she couldn't afford it at that moment. "I'll send money as soon as I get a job," I promised on the day of departure. "I'll help you bring Paul and Robert. We'll be a family again, just far from here." And so my new life began. The first few months were tough. The big city scared me with its constant noise, its anonymous crowds, its fast pace. Aunt Eunice's house was small, and I slept on a sofa in the living room. I got a part-time job as a cashier in a pharmacy while studying at night in a preparatory course for nursing school. But there was a freedom in that anonymity that I had never experienced before. No one knew me as the girl from the case. No one whispered when I passed by. I was just another young woman from the countryside trying to build a life in the capital. In 1961, I was accepted into nursing school. The program was rigorous, requiring long hours of study and practice. My days were split between classes, hospital internships, and work at the pharmacy. I slept little, saved every penny, and sent what I could to my mother. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was building something of my own, something no one could take away from me. It was during an internship in the pediatrics department that I met Edward, a young doctor just graduated. He noticed how I had a special way with traumatized children, how I could calm them down when no one else could. One day, after a particularly tough shift, he invited me for coffee. "You have a gift," he said, looking over the coffee cup at my face. "The children trust you as if they know you understand their fear." I hesitated for a moment, then decided to be honest. "I understand. I have been afraid too." In the following weeks, we met more often. He was kind, respectful, never intrusive, yet I kept my distance. The fear of trusting someone, especially a man, hovered over me like a constant shadow. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to," he said one night as we walked through the park after dinner. "But I want you to know that I'm not in any rush. We can take things as slowly as you need." It was the first time I cried in front of him. These weren't tears of pain or fear, but of relief, finding someone who asked nothing more than what I could give. In 1962, I received the news that my mother and brothers were finally moving to Belo Horizonte. With the money I had sent and what she managed to save from working as a seamstress, they bought a small house on the outskirts of the city. My brother Paul, now 18, got a job at a mechanic's shop. Robert, at 16, continued his studies. Our family was rebuilding step by step. "You saved us, Berenice," my mother said on the day I helped them settle into their new home, not just for exposing that monster, but for never giving up on us, even when she had every right to move on by herself. That same year, I graduated as a nurse and was hired by the hospital where I had interned. Edward and I officially began dating with my mother's enthusiastic blessing, as she saw in him the son-in-law she had always dreamed of. He was patient with my fears, respected my boundaries, and never pressured me. When I told him my whole story one starry night by the lakeside, he simply held my hand and said, "Thank you for trusting me enough to share this." We got married in 1964 in a simple ceremony with just a few guests. We didn't invite anyone from my hometown except for my grandfather, who was elderly but proud to see the granddaughter he had helped save now building her own life. Edward and I built a life together based on mutual respect and understanding. We had 2 children, Marina and Charles, whom we raised with love and protection without stifling their independence. I always taught them that their bodies belonged only to themselves, that no one had the right to touch them without permission, and that painful secrets shouldn't be kept. While treating children in the hospital, I often recognized signs that others couldn't see: the evasive glances, the overwhelming fear of adults, the revealing drawings. At a time when few spoke openly about child abuse, I became a voice within the healthcare system, insisting that doctors and nurses be trained to recognize these signs. That shoebox, which was the key to my freedom, was returned to me after the trial, but empty. For years, I kept it as a reminder of the power of truth, even when it takes time. When our daughter Marina turned 18, I shared my entire story with her and gave her the empty box. "So you can keep your own truths," I told her, "and know that no matter what happens, your voice deserves to be heard." Today, looking back at 83 years old, surrounded by my grandchildren, I see that the scared 12-year-old girl never imagined the fulfilling life she would have. The pain has completely faded. Deep scars never fully disappear, but I've learned that we can build something beautiful and meaningful even after the worst storms. And that's why I'm sharing this story today, so that others going through similar experiences know they're not alone, that holding on to evidence, seeking allies, and finally breaking the silence can be the first step toward freedom. The road will be hard, but on the other side lies the possibility of healing, rebuilding, and a life worth living. In 1975, when I was already settled in Belo Horizonte with my family, I received an unexpected letter. The yellowed envelope bore the postmark from my hometown, the place I had left so long ago. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. It was from Mrs. Irene, the former neighbor who had been there that fateful night of my 18th birthday. "August Mendez has been released," the letter said. "He has served his sentence and returned to town. I thought you should know." The news hit me like a physical blow. I sat down at the kitchen table, trying to catch my breath. Edward found me there, the letter open on the table, my face pale. "What's wrong, Berenice?" he asked, concerned. "He's out," was all I could say. In the days that followed, old nightmares resurfaced. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, feeling as if someone was in the room. Edward, always understanding, would quietly hold me until I calmed down. "He can't hurt you anymore," he would whisper. "You've built a life far away from him. He has no power over you." Rationally, I understood that. I was 34, a respected nurse, a wife, and a mother of 2. I lived hundreds of miles from my hometown. August probably wouldn't even know where to find me, but fear, that old companion, had come back, settling into the corners of my mind. It was my mother who surprised me with her strength. When I told her about the letter, I expected her to be as shaken as I was. Instead, she lifted her chin with determination. "We're going to visit him," she said. "What?" The idea sounded absurd, terrifying. "Not to talk or forgive," she explained. "Just so you can see him now, not as the frightened girl you once were, but as the woman you've become, so he can see that he didn't destroy you." At first, I refused outright. Why relive that horror? Why risk the stability I'd worked so hard for? But as the days passed, the idea started to make sense. Maybe I needed that final closure. Maybe I needed to look into the eyes of my tormentor no longer as a victim, but as a survivor. One weekend in July, Edward, my mother, and I took the bus to my hometown. We left the kids with my brother Paul. "It's something I need to do," I explained to Marina, who was 10 at the time, when she asked why we were visiting the town I rarely mentioned. The trip was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts. When the bus turned onto the dirt road leading to the town, I felt a knot in my stomach. So many memories of those streets, those houses, some good, many painful. We stayed at Mrs. Irene's house, now a woman with white hair. Her husband had passed away years ago, but she still offered the same warm hospitality. The town had changed little, maybe a few new houses, a renovated square, but its essence was the same. "He lives alone now," Mrs. Irene told us as she served coffee in a small house near the river. "No one wants anything to do with him. The bank certainly didn't take him back. He does odd jobs, fixes things, and lives almost like a hermit." The next day, Sunday, we decided to go to Mass. If there was a place where August would show up, it would be at church. Even after everything, people at that time and place still saw religion as a path to redemption. We entered the small church after the mass had already started and sat in the back pews. My eyes scanned the heads in front of me, searching. It was Edward who spotted him first, discreetly nodding toward him with his chin. There he was sitting alone in a corner, hunched over, looking much older than his 60s suggested. His hair, once black and neatly styled, was now completely white and thinning. His clothes, although clean, were worn out. Everything about him radiated defeat. I expected to feel something, fear, anger, even satisfaction at his decline, but what I felt was nothing. Looking at that diminished figure, I realized he had no more power over me. The monster from my nightmares was nothing more than an old man, lonely and discarded by society. At the end of Mass, when people stood to leave, our eyes met. I saw recognition in his eyes, followed by something like shame. He quickly looked away and hurried out the side door. "Do you want to go after him?" Edward asked, holding my hand. "No," I replied, surprised by my own calm. "I have nothing to say to him." That afternoon, we visited the cemetery where my father was buried. I brought flowers, and for the first time in many years, I was able to think of him without linking his loss to what came after. I remembered only the kind man who used to lift me onto his shoulders when I was little, who told me bedtime stories. We returned to Belo Horizonte the next day. The trip back was different, lighter, as if an invisible weight had been left behind. I realized I needed that moment, that look, to truly close that chapter of my life. Years passed, my children grew up, graduated, and started their own families. In 1985, I became a grandmother for the first time when Marina gave birth to Gabriel. 2 years later, Charles introduced us to Lucas, my first grandson. Today, I have 5 grandchildren, all adults, and 3 great-grandchildren who are the joy of my old age. Edward passed away 10 years ago, the victim of a sudden heart attack while tending to the rose bushes in our garden. I found him smiling as if he had left in peace. It was 48 years of marriage that healed many of my wounds. A man who never saw me as broken or damaged, but admired my strength even when I couldn't see it myself. In 1990, when my mother died, I also learned that August had passed away a few months earlier. He died alone in his small house by the river. It was the neighbors who, noticing the chimney hadn't smoked for days, called the authorities. I felt nothing but a vague human compassion for someone who lived and died in solitude, a solitude created by his own actions. Over the years, my work as a nurse brought me into contact with many children and adolescents who had been abused. My personal experience gave me a sensitivity that books cannot teach. In the 1980s, as these issues began to be discussed more openly, I helped create a care protocol for victims at the hospital where I worked. How do you manage to deal with this every day without falling apart? A younger colleague once asked me after we treated a 14-year-old girl showing clear signs of prolonged abuse, because I know that every child we help identify and protect is a victory. I replied, because I've seen both sides, the silence that destroys and the voice that frees. In 1995, at the age of 54, I was invited to give a lecture at the Conference on Child and Adolescent Protection. I spoke to an audience of healthcare professionals, social workers, and educators. It was the first time I shared my full story publicly, without hiding details, without disguising the pain. What saved me was not just the courage to finally speak. It was the decision to document everything, to keep evidence even when no one believed me. It was about transforming my pain into concrete proof that could not be denied. That lecture led to more invitations. Soon, I was traveling across the country, speaking in schools, hospitals, and specialized police departments. It wasn't easy to relive that story over and over, but whenever I saw understanding on a teacher's face or commitment in a police officer's eyes, I knew it was worth it. In 2000, I helped found an NGO dedicated to combating child abuse. We named it Shoebox, in honor of that simple object that changed my life. The organization provides temporary shelter for children at risk, psychological support for victims and their families, and training for professionals who work with children. Looking back today, I see how the decision made by a 12-year-old girl to keep evidence in a shoebox, followed by the courage of an 18-year-old girl to speak out, shaped not only my life but also the lives of many others over the years. My granddaughter Gabrielle followed in my footsteps and became a child psychologist. "You were my inspiration, Grandma," she told me when she received her diploma. She turned her worst experience into help for others. In recent years, with the rise of social media and the internet, our work at the NGO has taken on new dimensions. We created online campaigns, virtual support groups, and safe channels for reporting abuse. The world has changed a lot since 1954. Today there's more awareness, more protective measures, and more people willing to listen to children. However, I know there is still much work to be done. There are still children like August out there. There are still children silenced by fear. There are still adults who choose not to see the signs. That's why I continue to share my story, even at 83 years old, even when my voice falters and my hands tremble a bit. When I see my great-grandchildren playing in the garden of the house I share with Marina and her family, I feel a deep gratitude. Gratitude for having survived, for finding the strength to break the cycle, for building a family where love doesn't come with pain, where secrets are sweet, not toxic. That shoebox which held my pain for so long has become a symbol of something much greater. Proof that even in the darkest times we can find a way to the light. It's not an easy path, it's not a path without scars, but it is a path that is possible. And if you're watching this now, recognize this pain. If you carry a secret that feels too heavy for your shoulders, know that you are not alone. Know that your voice matters, that your story deserves to be heard, and that there are people ready to believe in you. The first step is the hardest, but on the other side lies the possibility of healing, peace, and a life you deserve to live fully. This is the lesson I learned on my long journey, that we are stronger than we think, more resilient than we're often led to believe, and that our stories, even the most painful ones, can become beacons of light to guide others. My name is Berenice Ferreira, and this is the story of my shoebox. Dear friends, if you enjoyed my video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. A kiss from Grandma Berenice. Until next time.